The presentation today is from Orchestra Networks. We were planning for a customer, but a deadline meant that customers had to do something else. So I've stepped in to present something a little bit similar, but from a vendor's point of view. So hopefully that'll be something that's going to be of interest to you. And we'll move on through this, and you'll understand through the presentation why we've called it Worlds Collide. A little bit about myself. Also to add a little bit of fun with regards to photographs. My name is Paul Billingham. I'm Vice President of Orchestra Networks, looking after a region called EMEA North and Asia Pac, where I have responsibility for all activities in those regions for customer success. I've been around for a while, but I'm also a family man, so trying to emphasise I'm just one of you guys. I'm a family man. I have 3 children, 2 dogs. My daughter wants a rabbit, but that's not going to happen. So from that point of view, a normal guy. I like my sport. In fact, sometimes it's the area where I can switch off from work and the family. Football is probably the #1 priority in that, and I support a team called Aston Villa, which actually is very well represented by the Nordic region. I'm often sitting next to the Scandinavians when I go to see them, but I do all the sports as well, but I do less myself. I just watch more and more sport as I get older. I also do a lot of travelling, both on a personal level and clearly from work with regards to looking after customers in Asia Pac and Australia. So there's quite a bit of travelling. British Airways may not be getting my business in future because, like Greg, I'm also one of those people that have been attacked and they have now my credentials. Because I fly a lot, I get the great opportunity of watching a lot of movies. So the theme of this is geared around a movie, but more of that later. But I continue to want to challenge myself in my personal life with my children often. So at the beginning of this year, in the cold, I started to learn to surf, starting with the boards that you can see there, which are boogie boards. I've only just migrated to the big boards. It's harder than it looks, okay? One thing that I used to do when I was young, and I've started to do again now, so it could be deemed a midlife crisis, is I'm actually racing motorbikes. That's a 600, which is what I had to do before I could go up to the 1000cc, which I've now migrated to. Could be a midlife crisis, as I said, but as I'm 52, that means I'm going to get to 104. I think that's pretty cool. But from a business point of view, which clearly is something that you may resonate more with, is my experience. I'm quite old, therefore I've been around a long time, and in the mid-80s, after leaving education, I went into IT as a developer. But as I moved through that axis of that dimension, I then quickly moved into the business side of actually data management in '95 by joining a company called Ardent, where I met Richard Branch, who you may remember was on the panel earlier. So he and I have been around together for a long time in the data management world. That turned into a company called Essential, which then turned into IBM. I then moved on to BEA, which is was a massive company by the time it got acquired by Oracle. And then I moved to Informatica, where I met Greg. So, you know, we all know each other from time to time. We have very similar experiences, and in fact, we often share the same customers. In 2008, I joined Orchestra. At that time, it was a company of 16 people, and they only wanted to focus on MDM, and that actually was something I was quite keen on doing, focusing on one area. As a company, they are French, and I used to apologise for them being French until we voted to be leaving Europe. So because of Brexit, I encourage people to work with the French, because otherwise I'll probably lose my job. It's a company that's grown organically. We've had very little investment outside of Orchestra Networks. We want to grow our business and stay in control. Very profitable. So we reinvest that profit into the business, and we're now approaching 200 people, but we're also approaching 200 very large organisations who are using our platform to be able to manage multiple things, but initially at least focused on MDM. Some of those clients may be clients you recognise. The logos are deliberately small just to make it all look a little harder. The 2 larger ones are probably the ones that will I'll be repeated throughout the presentation because they've got a lot of interesting projects on the go where they share the same platform for multiple reasons, not just master data management. And we'll bring it back to the analytical and operational space very shortly. But the interesting thing is that MDM often gets discussed around customer and product, and maybe a few other domains. But if you look at Technip there, they have 32 domains live in production, which is an enormous amount of different types of data being managed by the same platform, and for them to repurpose that data for operational and analytical needs. I did say I'll bring it back to film. Some of you may know this film genre. I like all kinds of films, whether they're silly or serious or entertaining. And this is all about the hot shots, which is always a bit funny. And that's why the part 2 is there. But also in part because actually I'm going to expand beyond operational and analytical needs, because actually that was a discussion I was having in 2015. But it would be nice to show you what World Collide could be presented as, because it is always about context and perception. So let me play a video. Hopefully it's running. The one thing I said was, please, can I have sound? Is there any way we can get sound? Is there anybody here? I'm dead. Is it 100% on the laptop? If you're a fan of Seinfeld, you've probably seen it before. But it does talk about how his worlds have collided because one of his friends has introduced one of his girlfriends to his wife that he doesn't want them to work with. And the collision of these two aspects of his life is obviously of concern to him, and he describes it as the worlds colliding, and the result being that his life will blow up. So that would have been a nice segue into why we called it the Worlds Collide, because a matter of perception was, at least in 2015, because I'll move on, otherwise we could be here forever waiting for resources. Here's the fact that in 2015, at least, when I presented something similar to the MDG event in Australia, was the fact that actually, at that point, still, the two parties of operational requirements and analytical requirements didn't want to talk to each other. They didn't want to be brought together for all kinds of reasons around people, mostly. But it is actually common sense to be able to try and bring these things together, because you want to be able to benefit from each other. And from an analytical point of view, you can clearly see the opportunity for more operational improvement if you're using the same data and the same analytical processes. So that was 2015. There was, surprisingly, many people in that position. And occasionally I'm still seeing that, which is, again, surprising, especially with the advent of big data. As people migrate to there, people want to miss out all the hard work. They just want to straight into big data, the big data lakes, and see what that can do for them. But actually, you need to govern that data, first of all. You need to understand it, describe it, what type of hierarchies or not, are available for you. A great example is a company called Technip. We have many that we can call upon. Technip is an engineering company targeting the energy space. They are really, when you look at their business, they're actually a project management company, but within that company, they have multiple areas of lines of business. They're a very distributed business, but yet they recognized that they needed to grasp and put their arms around managing data for the benefit of their analysis, but also for reporting back to the industry on what they were doing and how they were doing it. And they couldn't do that because their data was everywhere. So Technip used our platform to aggregate all of this data, to consolidate this data, to describe this data, such that then they could build onto their data warehouse a mechanism for them to be able to analyze their operations and also to improve their operations over time. So that was version 1, really, of Worlds Collide. Obviously, my title was version 2. But that really could be described as a slight change in focus. So if we change that title to something that was more along the lines of the convergence of MDM, reference data management, and data governance, to support all of your enterprise requirements, then that's really where we are now. Some of our colleagues have described what they're doing in this area, and it's something that is resonating, and we're getting a view from our customer base and the market when we're responding to RFPs that this is an aspiration. They're not always there. Some are further down than others. What they have identified is that they need to be able to connect these things together. Depending on your strategy, ours with our clients is to try and pull this all together into one application, one repository, one user interface, one common API, to allow you to be able to connect these things together. So we can see that master data is the truth, and I think most people understand that. It's a well-known common description of what master data is trying to achieve, removing your duplications, therefore allowing your consolidation and your roll-up of analytics to be appropriately correct. But you want to add context to that, which is typically defined as reference data. And reference data is actually a little bit more complex than people first think. They often think of it as just a list that helps them classify their larger objects, such as customer or product. But actually underneath that, actually they can be quite complex because they change over time. So it's almost like a slowly changing dimension inside your data warehouse. So managing the versions of those is actually a little bit more complex. And therefore, you want to be able to have those connections to your master data embedded in the same application, because you then have rules on those connections. And if they're in separate solutions, having rules on those connections means you're doing it in a data integration layer. No visibility to the business, no value whatsoever. And the same can be said of the new vogue around data governance. When we analyse what data governance has been meaning for our customers and what they've been doing with our platform to address data governance, is they're using the MDM as a capability to address metadata management for both technical and business, and applying the same disciplines as they would to any master data object. So they've seen that the value of the same platform being repeated across MDM, reference data, and data governance, allowing them to have connections throughout. Now, this will be seen by the business as understanding lineage, and there's different types of lineage. I'll talk about Citigroup, in particular, about this type of lineage. Excuse me, I'll just have a drink before I carry on. Citi are a very large financial institute. They are a long-standing customer of Orchestra Networks, and they've used their platform for many projects. But a couple of years ago, they started down the line of using our technology to augment their existing big data program, which they wouldn't say was failing, but it wasn't delivering on expectations, especially as their budgets for big data were pretty enormous. And the main reason was nobody could understand what data was in there, and nobody described it, nobody knew where the data came from, nobody knew which entitlements you had to actually see that data. So actually it was a little bit of a mess. By using our technology in conjunction with their Cloud Era platform, they've been able to grasp that nettle. They know who owns the data. They know who has permissions to release data. They know that when the data scientists are picking the attributes that they want to pull out into their own little environment, that they have the right entitlements to that, because you're not going to see all the data. It's based on your permissions. So all of that aspect is actually managed by our technology, but drives how the big data is then being used by the data scientists and the business users. That is actually often represented as lineage. And lineage is pretty well understood when it comes to data lineage. And I try to make a distinction here, because knowing where the data came from is often a result of the metadata we're collecting from things like your integration platforms. But it needs to be connected, and these connections are relationships that we can manage and model inside our tool, and therefore you can use as an evaluation tool. And then connect them to your business glossary and your data dictionary. All of those are defined and managed in the same platform. And it's those connections between them that are the real power of our solution. Any object can be connected to any other object. So if we model it inside our tool, then you've got an opportunity to evaluate it and reuse it and understand. So most people understand that type of data lineage. I did press. So if we look at data lineage from a point of view of an object, let's look at entity. We are looking to see how it's defined at the legal level, and that's typically reviewed through the business glossary. That's your jump-in point. It's also the place where do legal entities map to other regulations and classifications. We've heard mentioned more than once things like CDE, your critical data elements. Critical data elements tend to be evaluated as a top-down activity within the business. What is important to the processes that I'm trying to achieve? Not the bottom-up where you have technology going searching for all your metadata and trying to evaluate using AI to work it out. Both are applicable. I would say both should be run in synchronization. From a data dictionary point of view, this is clearly where we're doing the how. How was the legal entity implemented, and quite often where. And the master data reference is the actual entity itself, the values, the customer, the product. And by having them in the same platform, these connections can be made. And this allows both operational and analytical to understand that. Quite often reviewed and viewed as a hierarchy, but the point is the relationships are there and can be seen as a graph. If you apply this a little bit more to the analytical space, then you often see that the MDM components start to become more and more relevant, because actually in the analytical space, we also want to know how we're merging data together, because quite often you'll see not just that I'm Paul Billingham spelt one way in one application and another, but also you can also, which are easy to spot, but the volumes tend to be high. The more difficult ones are things around like ANSI and UTF-8 considerations. But if we have it all in the same application where we've already done that hard work of consolidation, then the application can be the best place to document all of this, and therefore for the analytical platforms to take full advantage of. So if we take the same entity, take the same entity, what's the definition of illegal? How does the definition of legal entity relate to other definitions? This is often really also in connection with your taxonomies around GDPR, or if you're a bank like Citi, BCBS 239, where they've actually implemented all of these taxonomies inside EBX and connected them to their real data. But also in the data dictionary, you're trying to understand, well, where does this data come from? How is it represented in those data? Have we consolidated? Have we sent the data back? All of this process is managed within the same application. And then in the master reference data, that's where you're managing your taxonomies, your reference data, your hierarchies, and how are the entities rolling up to be able to achieve the reports that you're using within your business for both operation and analytical needs. So we would suggest that if you look at this, this is absolutely a neural network. This is a very simplified version, because a neural network diagram tends to be congested and you don't get to see a lot. So this is a very reduced form, but it's a network of objects that are interrelated. And then on every link between those, there is valuable metadata or understanding. And it's being able to exploit that the big data and the analytical landscape needs to have, but on the operational space needs to have also to be operationally efficient. And this is where the MDM disciplines continue to be evolving, but also keeping value back to the customers. I did try and say I'd get us back on time. So to close, from our customers, rather than my kind of response, then the customers who have presented to these events themselves use this forum to give this type of information back, is that we really clearly need to, like operational and analytics, we need to avoid siloing your MDM, your reference data, and your data governance. We should look at them holistically. If you can't do it from a tool point of view, you still need to look at them holistically as a program of activity. They should be joined together. Because those connections between them, those relationships are super important when it becomes to your analytical landscape. The data lineage is expanding. It's no longer just around horizontal data lineage. Where did my data come from? What's transformed it? Who's acted upon it? What operations have acted upon it? It is about now a vertical lineage of where it's impacting business operations, where it's impacting entitlements, and with regulation, what's it impacting on regulation. And the latter one is a kind of lineage in its own right. That regulatory lineage allows organisations to map between them. This has allowed people like Citi, who have done BCBS 239, to understand that when they implement GDPR, what are the common areas that we no longer have to look at because we've got them covered. And there are some aspects there are, and then we can concentrate on the areas that are not. And they can do that immediately because they've got it all documented and managed in one application. TechNIP, which is the last bullet point there, talk about trust a lot. They want to be able to make sure that their customers, internal customers and external customers, trust the data. That's all about knowledge about the data and understanding it. But they always put that last little bullet point in there, which may be a bit too small to read, so I'll read it out. It is, but verify. Their statement, in God we trust, in everyone else we audit. So it's one of those things that you have to have this regulatory activity to make sure that everything is still pointing in the same direction, that the application's meeting all the objectives, and are there areas of improvement. It's like any application. But because they're all in one place, it's actually a much easier activity for an organisation to bring on board, to understand, and move forward with. So with that, I achieved my goal of getting back on track. If I rushed anything, I apologise. Happy to answer any questions either now or outside. I'm actually with my colleague today, Lionel, who's with me. So both of us can answer questions about many of our customers, but also clearly about our platform. Okay, I'll leave it there, but thank you very much for your time.